You guys are doing pretty well. It's been a crazy week for me. Hopefully you guys are hanging in there and it's not too overwhelming. I'm enjoying being back to work though. So let's see. In this video, I'm going to recap a little bit on last week and some things we covered, some things I noticed about your responses. Then I am going to talk a little bit about some stuff on Moodle and what we're doing next week. So let's see. Last week, or this past week, we talked about rhetoric, and I had you guys reading the chapters, I believe, were reading rhetorically and thinking rhetorically. And then I had you guys take a quiz. And so I noticed with your quizzes, there is still a pretty blurry definition. I think a lot of you guys are touching on parts of what rhetoric is. It's pretty hard to nail down what rhetoric is, and I think the idea of reading rhetorically maybe made some of it a little confusing. But let's talk through it a little bit and like where you guys are. Also, I feel great about where you guys are with the understanding of rhetoric because I totally did not expect for everyone to feel like an expert of rhetoric, with one or two chapters of reading about it. So don't feel bad. I feel like you guys are pretty on target. So if you are feeling like you're not sure, or I responded to your quiz and said that it wasn't 100%, like don't feel worried about it. Just know that that is very much what I expected. So rhetoric, the book in the first chapter you read defines rhetoric as the art of persuasion and argument, right? So it's the way we piece together arguments, whether it be speech. So maybe think of it in terms of how the definition has evolved over the years. So rhetoric, going back in time, has been the art of argument for, since Plato and Aristotle. For a long time, the art of putting together an argument has been defined as rhetoric. As we moved on, and now we're in the 21st century, we put together arguments in a lot of new forms. Academia really brought to the table putting arguments together in essays and arguments that are published papers and articles and things of that nature. And, now in the last 30 years or something, we have so much more arguments that are memes, ads, internet things, just the layout of stuff online. So rhetoric has evolved to encompass all of those things, but at its heart, it's still the art of persuasion and argument. So where it gets a little confusing is when the book talks about reading rhetorically, which I think is maybe what threw some people off. So the book talks about reading rhetorically having to do with having an open mind and what does it say? Having an open mind, reading carefully, and attending to the text. So what the book is really meaning, it's trying to coin this term of reading rhetorically. It's talking about paying attention to the argument of the text. So rhetoric itself doesn't have a lot to do with your thought process. But reading rhetorically is essentially attending to the rhetoric within the text, thinking about you as the reader, what was intended for you, and if you're perceiving that or not, thinking about what the argument is, who the author is making that argument, and that sort of thing. So let's look at a couple examples. Let's look at this. So first, we'll look at some ads. So I feel like it's so ads would be kind of considered visual rhetoric in most people's idea of rhetoric. That's usually what we would call them. They also have like words, obviously. But so in this ad, this is a Heinz ketchup ad, pretty basic, but there's very specific rhetoric that they're using, right? And they're doing it intentionally to persuade you of something. So one thing to notice is that instead of saying no one makes ketchup like Heinz, which is probably what we would normally think of when we think of ketchup being produced. We wouldn't really think of ketchup as being grown out of the ground, right? We think about it being made. But they switched this word to grows, and that's a really intentional choice because they're trying to convince you of something. And then, in addition to this word switch, they are adding this chopped up tomato picture shaped in a ketchup bottle with their ad on it. So what is Heinz trying to convince us of in this visual piece of rhetoric? Maybe think about it for a second. Heinz is trying to convince us that their product, their manufactured product, is as close to natural tomatoes as possible. They're trying to convince you that what they are manufacturing might as well be straight off the farm. They might as well have, sweet little old ladies chopping up tomatoes and turning that into ketchup, preserves, or whatever in their basement. And that's what you're buying at the grocery store, right? So whether that be true or not, that's what Heinz is trying to convince you, and they're using visual rhetoric cues to do that. So if I am reading rhetorically, I'm being attentive to that. So instead of just taking this and kind of assuming, cool, I like ketchup and Heinz grows it, I'm going to dissect it a little bit. I'm going to think, who put out this ad, first of all? What are my first thoughts reading it and looking at it? Like, am I hungry? Does it make me want tomatoes? It kind of makes me want to go to the garden and grab a fresh tomato and eat it. And then I think to myself, why do I feel that way? Do I feel that way because I was feeling that way, or because I'm being convinced of something in this visual argument here? So it is important to read. Reading critically includes having an open mind, right? But it's not a part of the rhetoric itself. It just means that we're being open to the rhetoric, but we're also pushing back a little bit. So it's kind of just being attentive and cautious as we read. I think probably at least the best advice that was given to me when I was in my first year of college by a professor who I really loved was to read first openly and push back later. When we start getting into things in the class that maybe you don't always want to agree with right away, or you don't understand right away, or maybe you just don't like it, maybe you don't love the genre and you think it's confusing and weird, being a good reader, I won't even say the word rhetorical reader in this instance as to not confuse you about rhetoric. Being a good reader means that you will listen carefully and then you will push back. And reading rhetorically means that you're going to listen carefully and pay attention to the rhetorical cues that you're being given. Think about why the author is giving them to you and think about how you're perceiving them, and then maybe push back or engage with that. So I'll give you a couple more examples. So here we have this was a pretty popular Nike ad. Sorry for my little box. So this is a pretty popular ad by Nike a few years ago. I want to say that this came out around 2016, but I might be wrong about that. This definitely came out around the time that Black Lives Matter protesting started, I believe, if I'm not messing up my timeline. But essentially, Colin Kaepernick started kneeling during the national anthem. It was really controversial. So Nike took this position of putting him in an ad, which in and of itself is a rhetorical choice, right? So Nike choosing someone who has been surrounded by political controversy and placing them on an ad is a pretty big rhetorical decision that the marketing company made, or the marketing department of Nike made. And then it says, believe in something even if it means sacrificing everything. So we could really take this apart. Some people loved this ad, some people hated it, some people loved Nike for it, some people hated Nike for it. Ultimately, I think that Nike was pretty aware that that's what was going to happen. I think that was their rhetorical goal, right? They wanted to stir the pot a little bit. They wanted to appeal to a younger audience who they think is going to be their younger athletes buying their product. And they were pretty okay with losing some of those older consumers if it meant really enlisting those new consumers and making them feel like they're a part of a younger movement in time. So there's a lot going on in here, but if I'm reading rhetorically, it means that I'm going to look at this first without getting emotional about it, regardless of where I stand on the issue of Colin Kaepernick. Before I think to myself, like, oh my God, I just love what Colin Kaepernick stands for, so therefore I love Nike and I'm going to go buy their product. Or before I think to myself, I hate that guy, I'm going to burn all my Nikes. It means that I, like, hold up on my emotions there for a minute and just, like, it's fine to feel emotional when you're reading, but I would hold it in if I'm reading rhetorically and really pay attention to who made this document, why they made it, what the purpose was, why they put his face on it, blah, 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 blah. And when I really, like, think about it critically as a reader, and I think about the rhetoric that's been given to me and what it's supposed to make me feel like before responding, if that makes sense. Also, feel free to, like, respond to these videos with questions. I know it's hard because it's a pre-recorded video. One more. So I just threw in another one about Colin Kaepernick. A little bit more recent, right? So memes are a huge part of visual rhetoric today. Rhetoric on the internet, like, widely consists of meme culture, as well as social media presence, Twitter, right? Like, we are constantly criticizing politicians and people who are in the public eye based on what they are posting on Instagram and Twitter. That's really common right now, right? We are paying attention to the rhetoric in those places. We are making memes about things to make political points, to make political arguments, and that's what makes them rhetoric, because they are a piece of persuasion and argument, and they do so visually and with words. They have tone, they have audience, they have arguments embedded within them. So our job as readers in this class and writers is going to be to pay attention to what rhetoric we're getting, as well as paying attention to what rhetoric we're putting out. So these memes right here. So this one meme. So what's happening in this meme is that we have very intentionally, and this is really common right now, actually, like, a lot of memes are putting things side by side, right? Like, I've seen so many memes and artistic drawings just this week of the shooter from Kenosha, Wisconsin, who had a rifle at the protest, with the Jacob Blake, the man who passed away. No, I'm sorry, he didn't pass away. The man who was shot by police in Kenosha before those riots started, right? There's a lot of that going on. And so thinking about that rhetorically would mean that we're really thinking about why those images are side by side and what that is supposed to incite in us as a reader. You can agree with it or disagree with it, but thinking about, for this meme, we don't know who the author is, right? So we can't really think about that. We can't think about who the author is or what their points of view are or what their interest is in us seeing this meme. And the same way that we can with a company, with Heinz or Nike, we can really think about the author of it being that company. And so, right, they have a vested interest in people purchasing their products. With this, we don't really know what the author is getting out of it. So we can't really bring that in the mix, but we can see what the author is clearly trying to convey to us. And they're trying to get us to compare a couple of political things that have happened, and they're trying to make a specific argument by doing so, right? They're trying to make people understand that what Colin Kaepernick was doing was valid. They're trying to compare to similar movements and the nation's response to those kneeling things, and what they're questioning us as a nation. What are we okay with? What do we agree with, right? So there's a really specific rhetorical point and argument. And so I'm paying attention to that, and I'm really engaging with it. And another thing the book really talked about, I'm going to look at it for a second. So the book, after it defines, it does use the words attending carefully and being open-minded, which I think is what threw you off a little bit about the definition of rhetoric itself. But it's talking about paying attention to the rhetoric, if that makes sense. And it talks about previewing the text, annotating as you read, noting key points in the argument, right? So paying attention to those the key points that we're seeing. Considering who the author is and the audience. So if you're the audience of something, or if you're thinking about it, am I the intended audience for this, or am I just an audience member who was unintended? Right? So when you read my syllabus, you were the intended audience. But if someone else picks up my syllabus on the quad, they're not the intended audience, so it's going to affect them differently. They don't have a vested interest in their grade. They're not going to care about that. So thinking about that, whether you're the intended audience or not, and what that means for you in the position of the reader. Take note of your reactions. Think about your emotional response. So if your first response is emotional, if it's anger at it, if it's disagreement, if it's super huge agreement that you feel passionate about, thinking about that and then considering, did they want that from me? Was that the intended reaction that I was meant to have? And if so, why were they successful in getting that out of me? Not necessarily in a critical way, but just thinking about how things affect you as a reader and why they affect you as a reader. Because then when you're writing, it's going to be really important that you think about that you think about how and if you are getting your intended reaction out of your reader. Paying attention to the text design is another important part, right? So we were doing that in this. You did it in the syllabus really well. So let's see. I'm going to X out of this. We don't need that anymore. We're going to come a little bit into this for a second, but you guys did a great job with the syllabus. You really did read rhetorically when you were engaging with the syllabus, even though your understanding of how you were doing it may have been a little bit clouded. So some things you guys pointed out in that exercise were my age, which you probably could assume from these videos. So there's visual rhetoric going on in these videos, right? And that's part of it. Some rhetoric is intended and some is not. Like, obviously there's nothing I can do about my age. I can do things about my appearance, right? So you probably would think different of me if I like was online in a onesie or something, or like cat earmuffs, I don't know. Those things you would notice, right? So there is some intentionality of that. Where I am, like now I'm in my office, and I was intentional about like what I put behind me. I didn't want it to be terribly distracting. So that is part of the visual rhetoric, and I think I did mention taking in like the rhetoric of the course as a whole, what's coming at you. So you also pointed out being that my tone is compassionate, which is, I'm happy that you noticed that. Organized, upbeat, caring. Some people pointed out the purpose of the document, that it was a contract, that it clarifies expectations. The purpose is to enable students to feel like they have control over their own success in the course. All of that is true, and all of that was really good. So think about that, because I think a lot of times you probably read syllabi and you just like don't even consider at all, like you don't really think about it, right? It's just a piece of paper that you're given for every class. But in fact, it is a piece of paper that every teacher spends time putting together with specific ideas and values and things in mind for their course that they want to relay to you. And we pay attention to that, right? Like we pay attention to our tone when we're putting together our syllabus. We pay attention to images and things like that. So great job. So you're already in a really great place as far as reading rhetorically, as far as that goes in that exercise. Hopefully that helps clear rhetoric a little bit more, brings a little bit more clarity to the idea of rhetoric. So I'm going to move on from that. But I also just want to say that, first of all, I really love hearing from you guys, and it makes me a little bit sad that I don't get a lot of like one-on-one interaction with you. So please feel free to just respond in here, even if it's not a question, even if you just want to like, honestly, I don't even care if it has to do with the class. If you just want to like chat with me about how your week is going, your other courses, or like what would be really cool is if you, if something in this course you're reminded of something in, like out in the world that reminds you, or in another class that reminds you of something we're doing, share that with me. I would really love to hear it. So yeah, take advantage of that space. It's great for me when I see you guys posting things in there. Now, for this week, I want you to keep the idea of rhetoric in the back of your mind. We're kind of going to set it on the back burner for week 3. I really had to think about whether or not we were in week 3. But yes, so we're kind of going to push rhetoric aside. We're going to come back to it. Just keep it in mind. Maybe you can like practice some rhetoric observement on your own time, and you can tell me about it in the Talk to Professor column. But I want you to set it aside while we think about writing processes now, right? So you can, if you want, incorporate, if you want to talk about your writing process and you want to include some ideas of rhetoric and how you as a writer think about rhetoric while you're writing, that's great. But you have 2 readings. One is about the writing process in your textbook. I'm just going to talk about managing it and having one essentially. Also, I know some of you mentioned having trouble getting the textbook, so I sent out a couple PDF files last week to people individually. But for this week, I just went ahead and also posted a PDF of this chapter. So if for whatever reason you need that, go ahead and utilize it. And then this here is a PDF article that is really great, and it's talking about procrastination. So then you're going to talk in your forum a little bit about your personal writing process. There's questions and prompts and blah, blah, blah. And then you have your first writing assignment due. Sorry. So you have your first writing assignment due. And what we're going to be looking at here, I wish that I could, let's see. So it's going to cut off a little bit, but I'm going to still just try to, sorry. Having some technical difficulties. Also, it's Saturday. So anyways, goodness gracious, Morgan, get it together. Okay. Here we go. Sorry, guys. Let's see. So your writing day reflection. This is actually going to be part of a larger assignment. This is going to be, I think there in total is going to be 4 separate short writing assignments that you're going to be adding together for this, if that makes sense. It's in your syllabus as one full grade, as one paper grade. But it's important to know that it will all be coming together to create that grade. However, although it's one giant assignment, if you don't turn a part in, the 1 week rule still applies. So after 1 week, I won't be able to accept part of it, and you'll lose like a quarter of that entire paper grade. So just be aware of that. For this assignment, you're writing 1 page or a little more than that, 1 to 2, but at least 1 full page about your current writing process. Your idea of writing coming into this semester. You can include your feelings about writing. You can include any anxiety you feel when you write a paper for a class, for school. You can include and contrast how your writing at home and your school writing are different. Like maybe you really enjoy writing in a journal, but you really do not enjoy writing for school, and you can talk about that. It really is meant to be kind of a personal reflection, but I would also really love it if you can integrate some ideas from the course. So including how any readings so far up until this point have influenced your idea of yourself as a writer and the process, or if you just have some ambiguous goals as a writer in this class, like you feel as though you have never loved writing, but in this class you really want to strive to write your best papers, so you want to have a new writing process and you really want to do things differently this semester than other semesters. You can include that. That's a great thing to include. The purpose of this first writing reflection is really to be a starting point, and the purpose of all of them being one total assignment is really to see how you evolve throughout the course, right? So I want you to really think about like where you are right now as a writer and with a process of writing. And if you really don't have one, then you can talk about that. And you can talk about, and that is fine. That is great. If you want to just say like, I have no idea and writing always to me feels chaotic and I don't know what I'm doing. And, you know, all throughout my school career or my like actual career, I have hated every document I have ever had to write and I have no system. That's fine, but you need to stretch it out to 1 full page. So that's great. There are some questions to prompt. You don't need to list each question in your paper. I don't need it to be like a question and answer format. I would really much prefer it to be an essay format about like just a few paragraphs about how you're doing as a writer. The purpose for that also is just that you're already responding to questions pretty consistently in this course, and I do want this to be a different genre of writing. I don't want it to be the same as a discussion forum, right? This is a different genre. This is a little bit more like an academic essay, but also a reflection piece, okay? That's in Bolt, so double spaced MLA, so that means you're just going to format it that way. It's going to be double spaced. It's going to be in appropriate academic font. It's going to be, you're going to have your name and my name and the date and the course at the top of the page on the left side. I had to think about my right and left there, and it's opposite for you. I think so. And then I do have this listed as a Google Doc. I think some of you had some issues doing that, and that is really totally fine. I don't need it to be a Google Doc. I think that it being a Google Doc is helpful in the sense that we are going to be adding to this document. But if you want to have one Microsoft Word document, that is also okay. And you can also submit that. I guess I don't have the option for submitting, but as opposed to writing in the text box, you would just like, I don't know, I have a MacBook, so I just drag and drop it, but I think you can like select a file from your computer as well. Pretty sure that would be like a given in this, I don't know. So anyways, you can totally do that, but please, when you do your next one, it needs to be on the same document. So however you do it, you need to save it and be ready to add to it. And also the pro of it being a Google Doc is that I can write my feedback on the Google Doc. I can request access and do that so that you have it when you do your like later things or whatever. So whatever works for you, and if you have trouble somehow with submitting, you can just reach out to me. But the main thing to think about is just like overall the writing and what I want to see in that document. I think that is the main thing. So this is going to be due on Sunday at midnight. This is nonsense. I will change that. It's due Sunday at midnight, so be ready for that. This should be your final thing that you're working on this week. Other than that, I really hope that you guys are doing absolutely wonderful. Feel free to email me about any questions you have with this or post in the question and answer forums. I do apologize sometimes. I don't get notifications when you post in there, so I just have to check. So if you need an urgent response, you should probably email me. Let me think. I think there's nothing else I need to bring to your attention. I did want to also point out really quickly that I did ask you guys for a poll about times for synchronous classes, and I just want to let you know that that is still on my mind. I didn't just post that poll and forget about it, but I won't be adding in synchronous Zoom sessions until we get to our bigger papers, and then there will be some optional ones where you can ask questions about papers coming up. So hopefully that's great. I think that you guys are all doing really wonderful. Thanks for participating in the course. Thanks for doing these readings that I have picked out for you, and I look forward to reading your writing papers.